Kina semdol ka ke mo fa seda.
Welcome to Talking in Stations, a podcast about EVE Online. I am Matterall. Okay, today we have a huge week in EVE Online nullsec news, so we'll try to focus on that for most of the show. Lots happened, so let's find out. But first, here's the people that are going to be talking today. With me on screen is Caleb. How you doing, Caleb?
Hey, guys.
We also have Elise Randolph here.
Hello. Happy to be here. I'm glad we didn't have to stay up until downtime last night, so we can actually be awake for this.
Yeah, no kidding. We expect Suetonia might stop in just a few minutes, but we have as our guest Killer B here with us. How's it going, Killer?
Hello. Doing good?
Good. Killer B actually joined Elise and myself on the stream yesterday that went for about 8 hours. And he just talked a lot about what to expect, but he didn't actually participate in the fight. So he's a really, really good person to talk to about large-scale warfare and those kinds of matters, being a CSM. He actually ran on a platform of trying to work out bugs with the server so that you could play that high level in a high-level nullsec combat game. So he's familiar with server issues and those sorts of things. Of course, he's still under NDA, so we can't ask him direct questions, but he's got as good a view of it as anyone. So, okay, let's get started on what happened this week. Elise, do you want to kind of set up what happened? Because you may know more than I do.
Or right, so it's becoming a bit of a blur, but in the start of the new year, right? So for Christmas, both sides agreed to create, for the most part, no new timers, right? So after that kind of handshake agreement, I guess you can call it, after that subsided, Pappy got back to business in trying to siege Delve. There had been 3 systems where the iHubs had gone to Soft 3, allowing them to put in jammers. And those systems also had Imperium keep stars in them. So earlier, I guess almost exactly a week ago now, Pappy went and they reinforced 3 keep stars in 3 different systems of the Imperium. M2, the system next door, and another one, I forget the name. But the reason I forget the name is because largely those other 2 are going to be incredibly unimportant come Wednesday.
I'll look it up for you while you keep going.
Yeah, so come Wednesday, there's a fight in 5 TAC C over the jammer. It's a subcap fight. The Imperium are fighting Pappy over the jammer. The Imperium actually lose the objective, and they lose a good amount of their fleet. Not a huge amount. It's like 60-40, something like that. But in so doing, the keep star in 5 TAC C repaired. So they took the fight. Pappy decided to take the fight and kind of whiffed on the keep star. But that wasn't the end of the day. This was just a happy Wednesday afternoon. The Imperium went next door into M2 TAC. The jammer was not online, or it was cycling. So they had the ability to enter the system with capitals. And a surprise to quite a bit of people is they went ahead and did that. They dropped in their entire supercap fleet, as well as some capitals and their subcaps, onto their Keepstar and M2 TAC. Pappy responded by saying, "Hey, wow, this is a good opportunity for us. We have control of the jammer here. We can cycle it up and down whenever we want. This is the fight we've been waiting for. Let's see if we can match their numbers." And so Pappy rang all the bells, got their supercap fleet and system. They loaded onto the Fortizar grid, which was just like 10,000 kilometers away from the Imperium Keepstar. They warped down below, and for like 5 minutes or so, maybe even a little bit longer, as everyone was warping in, you finally had that moment that everyone had been waiting for in this war. There, 2 huge supercap fleets were staring eye to eye one another, like 250 kilometers apart. The Imperium were tethered to their Keepstar, so they weren't invulnerable. And it was an armor timer, so no matter what happened to the timer, they could dock. and get out in safety. So that was the advantage they had. Pappy had the advantage of controlling the jammer, which got to decide when people could come in or when they couldn't come in terms of reinforcements. So both sides had what they thought to be a pretty good advantage. Both sides liked the numbers that they had. And, we were kind of left to wonder, hey, what's going to happen here? This wasn't a planned super cap brawl. No one really expected that this was going to happen. And Imperium, to the surprise of quite a few people, probably, they detethered and started doomsdaying with their Titan super weapons, the Pappy Titans, which in turn, obviously, like 20 or so of them will kill a Titan, and they had 600. So Titans started to die, or they had 400 or something like that. So Pappy got very excited. They started returning Doomsday Fire, and spontaneously, the largest Titan and Super Cap fight that Eve has ever seen up until that point happened just on a random Wednesday, and that went until downtime. The Keepstar ended up getting reinforced. 260 some odd Titans died. It was almost completely equal coming out of that fight on Thursday morning. Both sides were claiming victory. This is something that had really never happened in Eve before. Generally, when you're on the losing side of a battle, you kind of know it. But that didn't happen. Both sides not only thought that they won, but they were adamant that they won. They both achieved the victories that they sought out to, which was kill the enemy's Titans and Super Caps. Both sides are operating on imperfect information based on how many Super Caps are remaining, like in their caches. The Imperium firmly believes that they've got the most, so they can risk it. They also think that, hey, we're the defenders here. We don't necessarily need Titans. The attackers are the ones that need the Titans. So they were very happy making these trades. Pappy, on the other side, they said, hey, you know what? We've got the bigger bankroll here. We have the ability to keep making these if we even wanted to. So we like these trades. This is in our favor. And at the end of the first M2, with 260 dead Titans, shattering every record that we ever had, the previous record was 75. So we really shattered it. Both sides were like, hey, yeah, this is it. And during the course of that fight, the M2-Keepstar got into the structure timer. That structure timer was set to come out yesterday, late afternoon or early evening for the European time zone. Actually, I guess it's more late in the evening for the European time zone, afternoon for the US time zones. And both sides wanted to follow up on their victories. So both sides banged all the drums. They said, hey, this is our moment. This is going to be the defining fight of the war. Plus, you own a Titan. You dream about a fight like the first M2, where you get to just sit down doomsday for 11 hours straight and kill Titans to your heart's content. That's what you dream about. That's why you want these ships. That's why you work so hard to get them. So everyone was motivated. People were coming back from the Dark Ages to come and take part in this fight. The Imperium held like a fireside chat roundtable type thing to keep building that hype, saying, hey, we're here. This is what we've always wanted. This is going to be the defining moment, blah, blah, blah. So they put a lot of people down in M2. They loaded the grid, I think 5 hours before the time where it's supposed to be. And they amassed what was the largest Super Cap fleet that Eve had seen, kind of around there. I'm missing some details, but I'll still try and get through the bulk of it. Mm-hmm. The Pappy forces saw this. They said, oh, this is great. This is our moment. They were just as confident as the Imperium side. Again, this is something that you very rarely see, both sides that are assuming that they've got the advantage. So the Pappy forces formed an even bigger Titan fleet. And they even had an extra 200 or so logged off. So they were like, oh, we outnumbered these guys by a good 20%. Let's go ahead and get some blood. So the Pappy forces decided to come into the system. They were coming in after the Imperium people, or after the Imperium armies were in local. Generally, FC 101, just from small scale to big scale, one of the things you learn early on is the person that has loaded the grid first has a massive advantage, right? They have they load. They don't have to worry about what's going to happen when you load grid. They're already there. It's just how Eve works, and we can get into that later. But Pappy made the decision to come in on the Keep Star grid with an hour remaining for the Keep Star. They said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to come in here. It's going to take an hour for us to load, we estimate, based on how the server performed in the last fight. It's going to take an hour, and we know we're going to take it on the chin here. We're going to lose at least 20 Titans to just because we're going to have to wait to load." But they decided to make that call anyway. Crucially, they were coming in outside of Imperium Titan Doomsday range. So they knew when they loaded, at least the Imperium were going to be doomsdaying them to their heart's content. They'd just be dying to heavy fighters. So the Pappy forces signed in 380 kilometers away from the Imperium armies, but in range of the Keep Star. They waited an hour. Nothing really ever came. And then the server kind of ground to a halt in a way and acted in ways that were mysterious and funky. But the end result is the Pappy forces never really loaded grid truly as a unit. They just loaded piecemeal and ended up dying. Right. So we can really delve into, is this something that is expected to happen? A lot of people say yes, a lot of people say no, but I'm sure there will be a lot of second guessing and backdooring. But as of right now, it appears that 200 or so capitals died, or super capitals died. Of those, it looks like 75 are quote unquote real deaths of Titans that will count. And we can get into a little bit later what that means. But either way you want to slice it, a huge, massive, like almost crushing defeat for Pappy in M2. It's going to be really interesting to see how they rebound from this, because there are just so many disastrous implications after this fight.
Right. Thank you very much for that summary. You should note as a program note that during the stream, which was a great stream, we did have Killa B on early on. And then later, after the fight, we had the Big Red Boat on. We had Hippojacks on. Timerian, I think, was a Goonswarm FC. We had Asher Elias on for a good amount of time. And we had Villy on as well. Not all at the same time, but we had interviews with all of those guys giving their impressions on the fight too. So we'll publish those interviews separately on YouTube. So the funny thing about this is there's two chapters to this, and one is a fantastic, phenomenal showing by both parties and CCP servers a few days ago, and then kind of a disaster yesterday. Somebody who knew that disaster was coming was Killa B. Tell us what you thought about what was forming yesterday, Killa B, and did it play out the way you thought it would?
Obviously, I didn't anticipate exactly the way it played out, because there's no way to expect the servers to behave in the way they did. But I was very skeptical when I saw what the Imperium had already sitting on grid, and I was listening to what our guys were planning to do. There's a lot of arguing and discussing going on about whether or not we had a choice internally. This is nothing that's being discussed on Reddit. I think that some people say there was no other way for us to go, and I think that's fair. I think I should start probably by saying that I think the Imperium deserves this W, because they put the commitment in. They decided to go and sit in that system for 4 or 5 hours. And that takes commitment, that takes setting up. They set up in a way which denied us some other strategies that we could have went with. Obviously, a good portion of our super cap fleet from the first M2 was still stuck in a position. So I want to give some respect to the Imperium, therefore, committing to that grid that early, sticking it out, and that's what won them the time, obviously, and also, that was well deserved. Server performance, like I said, you can't really predict what's going to happen in timers like these, but to me, from my personal experience, when I look at a grid that already has 5,000 people sitting on it, right, and then you have 6,000 people formed of your own in your staging, I just, like I said, I think right before the fight, I asked our lead FC, he was like, how do you expect to get like all of our people on this grid? There's no way the server's gonna hold up. Like it's gonna crash. You're gonna have people stuck in tunnel forever. All those people are just gonna die. And as Elise said, he explained to me, look, that's part of the plan. I know that we're going to lose a good chunk of people at the initial sort of broadside of the battle, but we're going to stabilize towards the end of it. And if we manage to kill the Keepstar and we manage to hold down the Imperium forces, this is going to be a 2-day fight, and we can log back in after downtime and we can keep killing. Because if the Keepstar had died, the Imperium forces would have sat there pretty exposed, right?
Mm-hmm. Couldn't they have withdrawn as the Keepstar was going down? Couldn't they have found a way to withdraw, do you think?
Oh yeah, you can always extract a good chunk of forces, but it's worth mentioning that we had a very sizable amount of Hictors ready to go. Obviously, we did prepare a lot of forces to be able to hold down the Imperium for as much as we could. But as it turned out, that never came to fruition because the servers just ended up sort of dying. And I mean, again, it's kind of what I expected. It would be stupid to say I knew exactly that this was going to happen. You guys made a big mistake, because I don't think that's the case. But I was really skeptical. I was like, how locals already at 5K. How are we going to cramp another 6,000 people in there? How are we going to load all of our ships? I was very skeptical about that.
And you mentioned that
it makes sense.
Beforehand, you mentioned that publicly, like,
Yeah, I mentioned it. I said it on TIS. I said it on Twitter. I said it everywhere. Like I said, look, I'm with my guys, obviously, because my loyalty isn't in question. I'm gonna stick with my dudes no matter what. But my opinion of it was that I think it's gonna be a very very spicy decision to make, because you cannot in a fight that size, you just don't know what's going to happen. And you are always at a disadvantage jumping in second. The Imperium already sat there with all their forces loaded on grid. So even if our dudes were able to jump in, and even if we were able to load the grid in a reasonable amount of time, the Imperium had the advantage of already having their fighter bombers set up on top of our jump-in spot, as well as having the Titans set up, so they can start killing immediately. So they're going to enter that fight with a good 20-30 Titan kill advantage, right? And that's something that you have to be willing to take. And again, my fleet commander, they told me, look, we're willing to take these initial losses. We think that towards the end of a fight, we can sort of balance that out, or we can make up for it. And I said, look, if that's what you believe it's going to go, just, you should do that. And they went with it. Unfortunately, it didn't go the way it was supposed to. And now we're going to have to deal with it. That's fine. As speaking for NC, at least our losses aren't that bad anyways, because all the Titans that we did lose were Ghost Titans for the most part. And then we'll have to see how our allies can cope with this. Obviously, one of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way about this is the fact that there was a population cap. I can link this in. Let me link this in the Discord, and then you can put it up on stream. Yeah, let me just find this for you. So basically, we had some people check out their outstanding calls, and some of the people literally said in the outstanding call thing that the entry to the system is denied because the population cap is reached or something. And that's something that I cringe. Like, I cringe really hard about that, right? Because in my opinion, if CCP are going to put in a population cap in a fight like that, they have to tell us. They have to let people know, look, the server is going to be capped at 4K people, because that would shift the entire landscape of the fight. If we knew, look, the system is capped at 6K people, Imperium already has 5K people in that system, we're not even going to bother trying to jump in. I put it in the podcast channel.
Yeah. We'll get that up on screen here in just a second.
It should be noted that CCP have yet to make a comment on this, right? So we don't really know what this exactly means. CCP have been very silent this whole time. I think CCP Aurora had mentioned something, but she's a community developer. She's not someone that can go in with the server and see what the ops are doing. So it just, obviously we see this and we don't really know the full context of it.
Yeah, so basically that's the only, I said this in my tweet as well. I think my tweet that I made this morning sums it up pretty well, right? I can just read out my own tweet. I basically said, it's easy to blame it all on CCP. Yes, performance was poor, and reading things like population cap makes me cringe, but I also question our decision to jump into a system with 5k plus people already in it. Imperium played this very well and deserved the W, no doubt about it. And that's my opinion on that still stands, right? I think that it was probably a bit naive on our end to assume that we're gonna get all of our forces on that grid, and our strategy was relying on the fact that we do get our forces into that grid, which I think is just a weird assumption to make in a scale like that. But then, when I confronted my fleet commanders about it, they just told me like, look, Killer, what else are we gonna do? Are we just gonna not go in at all? Are we just gonna, basically, I was in the same shoes in X47 too, right? Like I had to decide, do I go in on this or not? And I made the same decision they did. I jumped in and I ate shit, and now the same thing happened. So,
well, this is like an important thing, right? So that we have to kind of understand, why was this decision made? You're not talking about these FCs and leaders from Pappy. These guys aren't like 3-year-old characters that have never done this before. You're talking about the most seasoned pros ever. So why make a risk of this magnitude? And part of the reason is there is so much on the line for this one fight. This one fight could be the culmination of the entire war. This could end the war in one go if it goes your way. And also, it was really fun to do the first time, so people wanted to do it again, right? So that's the fight that's going on inside a lot of these FC's minds, because as Killa mentioned, if the Imperium, if Pappy are able to load faxes before they load Titans, right? If the faxes are the first ones to get in, this fight goes completely different. If the faxes get in and the Titans get in and you can kind of stabilize, then, maybe something happens and you can start sieging that Keep Star. If that Keep Star dies, then the entire Imperium Supercap force is stuck in space, where you can pin them down and then just go around the rest of Delve and do anything you want to your heart's content, because their entire army is stuck there.
Well, describe that a little. What do you mean by stuck?
Right. So if this isn't like the first M2 where if you win the timer, the Keep Star survives in structure and you can just get out whenever you want. Right. So if this Keep Star died in this version of M2, which is why this risk was taken, if this Keep Star dies, then the Imperium Supercap fleets that were tethered to it, they're suddenly tethered to nothing and just sitting in the middle of space. You put bubbles around them, you anchor bubbles around them, and you essentially, it's called hell camping, which is what Pappy is getting done to them right now. But you go in there and you just kind of pin them down, and those super caps, you might have 3,000 super caps, but they're stuck in space and they can't really do anything. So that allows you to go ahead and get all these strategic objectives that you want, because the Imperium are stuck there. Like, that's why that decision was made. And you're like, okay, well, why are the Imperium making this huge risk? Because the same is true for them, right? If they can win this fight, not only do they trade Titans very well, but they can decide that, where the Pappy forces are. And they can pin them down and keep them stuck in this system of M2- for weeks. And they can start retaking territory.
Yeah. And then you can see a case for, so these two fleets are going at it. If they're both in space without tether, without some kind of invulnerability, and downtime arrives, somebody's going to be buried. Like UALX, PL, and Triumvirate were buried in Winter Coalition. And like a few days ago, the Pappy fleet was buried. But they called it pre-staging because they were coming back to this fight. So it was a little bit different there. But this next round, if it had gone all the way, one of those two groups would have been buried, whichever one didn't come back to fight on after the downtime. And that's an interesting point. At that point, why not do attacks on the rest of Delve if it is Imperium that's buried? So strategically, exactly. It was a good gamble in that the success would have meant some real opening up some real possibilities.
Yeah, the end result was just too enticing for either side to kind of back down from, right? Because you work so hard for this opportunity. You don't get opportunities like this. We're talking the first M2 fight is the fight essentially that has never happened in EVE Online before. So you're going for part 2, and you're like, oh, this might happen, this might work. And in the back of your head, you're saying, if you're on the Pappy side, you're saying, hey, that first fight, the server was great. The server weather was fine. I'm sure we can do this again. But yeah, it is funny to see. Kill and I are both kind of removed from, well, I'm way removed. He's a little bit removed from the decisions. And our views on the things were a little bit different. I expected, when we were like diagramming the fight as it was going, I was expecting the subcaps to come in at the top and clear off the fighters and try and pause the keep star that way, which probably wouldn't have worked either, right? That's why I get to be here instead of in the FC room, because my ideas sound like they might work, but in practicality, they probably don't. But that's something I expected. And Killa, I'm sure, expected coming in on the Fortizar and then warping over, something similar to that, or even just whiffing.
Before we go on, but let's clear up that hard cap question, because that's going to be very controversial. I just want to read from one of our programmers at TIS, Dr. Spot. He says, hey, kids, before you grumble about population cap, that's a name, remember that outgoing calls and actual responses are different. Your client was asking, can I come in, or have I hit, or have it traffic control? The server couldn't or didn't respond because it was on fire. You didn't hit the cap. I'm not sure I understand that, but I thought he was saying
nobody does.
Yeah. So we don't know if it's a hard cap or if that's just a way of telling you can't get in for some other reason because the server's on fire.
Wait, am I hello? Yes.
Yeah.
So we played around with the stuff during the timer yesterday. I was sitting on comms. I was listening to our dudes trying to sort of reverse engineer what was going on, because we were trying to figure out, can we tell our Titans that never loaded to log off or something? And we actually figured out how to sort of get the people, at least the ones that never actually made it into M2, back into T5, right? So basically all people had to do was like check on your login screen, are you in M2 or are you in T5? And then people that were in T5 on their login screen, they just logged back in, and then they were like sitting at the sun in T5 with their Titan, and they went back to the keep. So there's so much weird stuff going on.
Yeah, the ghost chips.
Our dudes figured that out quite well. And I got a question by somebody who asked, like, should we count the ghost Titans at real deaths? And that's a good question, I guess. But most of those people, which is something I want to mention, is they still have their Titans, right? There's a dude in my corp, one of the avatars from NC that died. There is a loss mail of his Titan on Zekiel, but when he logged back in, he respawned in his Titan with all the modules and all the fittings in the Keepstar. So there is a kill mail on Zekiel, but his Titan still exists, right? It's just something
so
weird.
Far. Yeah.
So far. I mean, if suddenly it disappears from the Keepstar, then I guess it'll be dead. We'll see about that, right? But
that's the part we don't know, right? Okay, that is very interesting. There's a lot of weird stuff. We'll put on, I don't know if McLeod, can you put up Satonia's chart and he can explain what's going on here? But we still don't know what's going on with these ghost Titans. But let's talk about the ghost Titans now.
Sure. So the term Ghost Titan is used for a Titan that has generated a kill mail on Zekiel. But if you go and look at the actual kill mail on Zekiel board, you'll see that it doesn't actually have any fit on Zekiel boards. And generally, all of those Titans that we've been able to track are actually still alive in T5. So if you see a Titan kill mail on Zekiel board that's completely empty, chances are it isn't actually dead. It's back in T5. And those Ghost Titans also didn't generate any wrecks, and they're kind of buggy. They just exist in M2 without spawning a wreck.
Yeah, so this is something that has kind of existed from the early days of EVE Online, where Titans sometimes would die, but not really die. In the Dark Ages, what would happen is you'd log in after downtime, and the ships would actually just be floating there. So you'd go in there and board them and take them off. That was always a fun thing to do. That's what I suggested people to do yesterday. Looks like the game has changed, and that's not a thing that happens anymore. But the ships that died, if you look on Zekiel, as Tony was saying, the ships that died with no fitting at all, they only took like 1 million damage. For all the cases that we've been able to talk to, those ships are back where they started in T5 with their full fit, which is something that's a little weird. And some of them materialized 1,000,000 kilometers from the Keep Star. Some of them materialized inside the Keep Star, which is super weird because they jumped from a system into the station without actually ever hitting dock. That's a fun one. But really, no matter where you look at it, 75 Titans still actually died, right? So there's quite a few significant deaths.
Like
we're not talking. We're talking about like half of them are like don't really count because they're still in their ships.
But where was the majority? Where were the majority of those Titans, Suetonia?
Well, it turns out that Test actually lost the vast majority of the real Titans. That's mostly probably because they jumped first or they got into system first.
Yeah, Test jumped first.
Yeah, Horde Horde lost 44 total if you look on Zkill, but actually only 11 of them are actually dead. Like 33 of them, 75% of them are actually still alive. And then if you also look at the top right graph on the stream right now, almost every other alliance, such as like NC Requiem, Eternal, Fed Up, Brave, etc., they only lost 1 or 2 Titans.
Wow.
So most of them are safe in T5.
That's a huge data point, isn't it? That NC for instance, with all their might, only lost a couple Titans, and PL and Fraternity, like we're talking 1 or 2 in this huge loss. So it really was absorbed by Test. What was the other group?
Pandemic Horde had 11 of the...
Test and Horde, okay.
So this is, if you're in the Imperium right now, A, enjoy your victory parade that's going to last for the entire month of January. But B, this is just the absolute best case scenario for you. You cannot even think to ask for this type of thing to happen. Not only do you get a number surge because of this, you get to show up in your army, and it's sizable, right? The Imperium fleet that was in M2 yesterday, massive, bigger than anyone could have expected. Pappy's was a little bit bigger, but they've got more pilots, so that's expected of them. The Imperium showed that, hey, they're resilient, they're ready to do this, their members are willing to throw everything on the line. Number 2, you get the win. You save the Keep Star. You kill a bunch of Titans. Not only a bunch, you kill 75 Titans. And if that's not all, you kill basically exclusively Test Titans. And these are the people that you've worked with to kind of like single out of the war anyway. Your entire narrative is Test is next, right? So in this one fell swoop, you've hit them so hard that their war is actually like just coming to a stop. We're going to have to see in the next coming days what actually happens, right? But the war more or less comes to a stop. You get the advantage back. And you beat down Test super hard in the face by like dropping them by 60 Titans, right? So this is just super great news, compounding on super great news if you're the Imperium.
Yeah. We're going to lose Killer B really quick. Is there anything else, Killer B, that you want to cover or go back to?
I just want to say I really hope that people sort of take this a bit and stop, because when the Imperium attempted their bosun op, I think it has a name, I don't know the name, but yeah, when the Imperium attempted their bosun play and it failed because of tie-dye and some other factors, everybody kind of made fun of them and said, look, you should have expected this to happen, with these kind of AoE weapons, and now it's the other way around. Now our dudes are crying and saying like, oh, CCP servers are so bad, and the Imperium is saying, look, you guys should have expected this to happen. Maybe just like stop.
Well, let me add some color to that.
It's so weird to me. Let's just we should like, what I think is we should give some respect to the people on both sides for putting the amount of effort into what could have happened yesterday. The Imperium committed their forces hours and hours in advance. They had all those FCs available to them. They had all their people there. We did the same thing. It just didn't come to fruition for us, right? I think that this whole bickering back and forth between, haha, you guys got cocked by the servers, you're the bad guys, and now it's the other way around. Like, we have to accept the fact that once in a while both sides will get screwed over by the servers, right? It's just the way it is, and we should just enjoy the fact that we still have a war,
as you did in X47, right? This is the last question for you, Kilby, before you take off, and thanks for being here. At what at a certain point, you have to look at the situation. You're already in it, like you were in X47, where a lot of Titans were taken out because the server instability was just not allowing you to execute your game plan. What's it like to make that decision to say, gosh, we came all the way into this party, and I got to say, we got to quit before it gets worse?
Well, we did that yesterday, right? Like so I think it wasn't a very hard call. I was there when they made it. I think it was ProGod who suggested it. He said, like, look, guys, we've basically at that point we had basically figured out that most of our shit was still in T5, and it was only going to be, well, it's still a significant amount of Titans, but it wasn't everything we issued a jump command on, right? Like, we issued a jump command on 700 and something Titans into M2, and only about 100 or something had loaded. So we were like, look, this is 1/7 of the force we were originally committing. Maybe we should just accept the fact that the server is not working, and if we try to jump everything in and everything does make it on grid, then we're probably going to lose a lot more than if we just cut our losses right here. We take the loss of what's on grid now and we withdraw, right? And I think that was the right call to make 100%. I think if we had tried to jump people in and continue to jump people in, we would have just lost more. I think now it's really about, we have to wait for CCP to make a call. What's the deal with population cap, whether or not that may exist? Sorry, Spot Humane, for triggering you. And now we have to just wait and see what they say. If they say, look, something weird happened, or if there's something that we can expect to continue to happen at this kind of scale, because then we have to redefine our strategies, of course, right? Like, for us as an attacker, we kind of we have to wait now and see what CCP says. If they don't say anything, then we'll just adapt anyways, and we'll make our own conclusions. But if CCP does say something, then we'll adapt and we'll revise our offensive strategies, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, if there is,
that's really all we can do.
If there is a population cap, I can see the game in real trouble, because you guys have enough guys to fill up a system so that the opposite can happen as well. You put in 5,000 people and sit there and wait for timers. There's no reason to have battles in those situations anymore. So it has real implications of being too big to fail, either on the Pappy side or the Imperium side. Too many players to actually fail. And every fail, if a server breaks, the timer is always going to come through, because it's not even tie-dye timer. It's in real time. So any instability in the server means that the whatever structure you're defending is safe, which is really kind of a dangerous situation.
I want to clarify, because there's some confusion about it in the Twitch chat. In terms of when I said we were making for CCP to make a call or say something, it's not about SRPing the Titans we lost. We all know that's not going to happen. CCP doesn't SRP anything related to fights on this scale. At least that's what I've seen in the past. So I don't think anyone's expecting to get any SRP. But the main confusion for us at the moment is this whole population cap thing, and whether or not that is a thing in the first place, and if it is, what decides how big it is, or if it's always going to be set at a certain amount, and that kind of stuff. Nobody's expecting to get any SRP, of course. And again, speaking for NC, we're fine. I'm not sure how Test is on on Bank. But we had NC had replaced, I think, 40 of the 44 Titans we lost in the first M2, and now we lost another 5 or 6 in the second one. So I think we'll be able to replace those within the week. So in terms of just NC, we're pretty fine. Obviously, I can't speak for our allies, but I assume that they'll be pretty fine. Okay. And we'll see. For us, the war definitely isn't over. We're going to keep going. We just kind of have to redefine on how we're going to play it,
Oh, that's news right there. So you think the war is definitely going forward?
How's that news?
Because everything was on the table after that last battle. I mean, that's what people said. That's not what I'm saying.
I mean, at the end of the day, look, yeah, I guess it depends on who you believe, right? And what your public opinion, or what the public opinion is. But at least to the people that I talked to, the outcome of this fight wasn't necessarily going to decide the war, right? It certainly made a huge impact. I think we've said this from day one of the war to now. This war is won or lost purely on morale, and which side sort of gives up first. And in terms of morale, what happened yesterday for NC wasn't that big of a blow. because while it may or may not be true, most of our members just blame us not being able to complete what we wanted to do on CCP, right? Again, me personally, I don't think you can just put all the blame on CCP. I think there were some mistakes made by our side as well. But at least for the members, it's just like, oh man, the servers didn't hold up. The server sucks. So they kind of just blame it on that. And that doesn't really hit the morale as hard as, we lost the fight properly. If the fight went through and you lose because you just lose because you're worse or you perform worse, then that hits the morale a lot harder than, oh, the servers didn't hold up, right? So at least speaking for NC, we're fine. We're going to keep going, and the war is going to go on. And I'm sure that our allies are just as committed.
Awesome. Thanks, Killer B. Thanks for coming by.
Yep, no problem.
All right, now we'll go on to the server cap issue. Is there a server cap or not? I don't think that's anything that we can actually answer because it comes from CCP. And the reason that's important is because that's never been a stated limitation of the game. They kind of shrug and say, put in as many people as you want. We'll try to make the server survive whatever you do. They've never said, come on, guys.
We know it's a feature, right? We know that there is a feature in there to do this whole capping thing. It's just that it's usually on things like systems
JITA.
JITA, right? So the fact that it's there, it makes complete sense. And I also suspect that this might also have been something that CCP has played with, making it almost dynamic, so it can actually make sure that it's not flooding a node like this. So it might actually be something that ramps up while people actually try to log in, right? So exactly how it works, we don't know. But unless CCP has come out and said that there was an actual hard cap, I do not believe in any way that it's the case.
Well, our maximum is basically 6,500. And someone pointed out that the server stability was considerably worse at 6,500 than it was just a few people less at 66,000 people in system. So people think the limit might be around 6,500. That's kind of the thinking.
I mean, we have literally no idea, right? And that's something that, like, even if we do know, like as Caleb mentioned, it's just going to be something that you work around. We've gotten this far with whatever mechanics are in place. I see a lot of people, and this is something I think is kind of important to bring up, right? So when you're talking about people that should have known better, like you shouldn't have jumped into this. You should know that the server is going to be unresponsive at some level, and that is absolutely true, right? Like bringing 6,000 people into 5,000 people, shit's gonna break, to put it quite bluntly, but you don't really know the exact level of how the shit is going to break, right? So if you throw this back, the closest resemblance to this is Head GP, right, where we had a fight Halloween War 5 years ago or something, quite some time ago, where one group jumped in 800 dreads. They never loaded. They all died. They didn't even ghost an artifact. They just actually legit died. Right. So that's a disaster. But you're talking old infrastructure. This is before the 64-bit client. This is before all the upgrades that CCP made. Yeah, the closest similarity.
Brain in a box. It's before brain in a box calculations. A lot of technology changes since then. But yeah.
Yeah. The closest similarity that you can get to this really, and this goes back to the middle of last year when the Fountain conflict was like the hot point. And that's in KVN, right? There's a big fight in KVN over Keepstar. And it's not that people coming in lagged. It's just that the server rolled over, died, and turned off. Like that system node they just unplugged, right? So if you're thinking worst case, you're like, okay, worst case, we screw up just so horribly, the server goes horribly. Worst case, in the back of your head, and you don't think about this, you don't try to achieve this, but you're thinking, worst case, we saw what happened in KVN, things just turned off. It's not like a catastrophe. But this shows the new worst case is you load in 30 or 40 at a time, maybe, and then you all horribly, horribly die. So I mean, it is really, it's very easy to second guess these decisions. And but there's just so many things at play. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a perfect decision that was made. I can understand why they made it. I wouldn't have made it. Killa wouldn't have made it. But there's a reason that we're not leading this war at the same time,
Well, we asked Billy that when he was on, so you can watch that interview yesterday. And we said, why would you go in when there's already 4,500 people in there? How are you supposed to get enough people in there to win this fight? And he said he didn't know, and there is no way to know if the server is going to crash. It performed very well only 2 days ago in the exact same system. So you're talking about the same hardware, same situation, pretty much same players. And there's still overhead there from 4,500, which is what the Imperium had in there, to 6,500, if that's the biggest battle that EVE has ever seen. And again, that's not necessarily the cap at 6,500. I'm just saying that is the biggest battle we've seen. And the performance really tailed off in the biggest fight. I think it was was it YZN or why? And it doesn't matter. The biggest fight that EVE has ever seen, the noticeable difference happened around 6,500. So the point is, there was enough room there. I mean, that's like 1,500, give or take, and you don't need that many Titans, right? You're not going to put 1,000 Titans in here. You're putting in 500 or whatever. So there was enough room to come into this fight. So to say, this is from Billy's perspective. So to say there's not enough room for you to win this fight, why would you go in? And people are going to die and get kicked out of system, I suppose. So that number may change over time if you get in there and stuff. So that was the thinking that he had. There's enough room in there, and the stuff all performed well only a couple days ago. And again, when Killa B was facing X47, this was 2018, there was some clear instability in every fight. There was no fight that was stable. But by this time, we have seen, and they've worked on it for a long time, because Killa B was an advocate on CSM to work on the server stability. We have seen fights that have been very large, and the servers have held up, and we've seen some that haven't.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think, and we talked about this during the first M2 fight, is people got baited a little bit by how good that first server was, that first fight was. It was the most responsive I've ever seen, even on a big scale. But we're talking about, because it was an impromptu fight that sparked from basically the ether on a Wednesday evening, there were 5,000 people, 5,500 tops in that system. Like the average was 4,800, I think. So the group's that much smaller. We're looking at doubling that. So you're like, oh, we double it, maybe it's going to be half as good, but that was still good, right? So like you have all these things going on in your head.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know. There's definitely, the preponderance of wisdom among the FCs is that's a sketchy situation to commit everything to. And it's funny, I wondered how much people were forced into the decision. I'll just say Vili ProGod, because I imagine they're the ones that made the call here. Forced in the situation because you've called so many people for this fight. And you do have the incentive. If it works, you're going to have what you need. You're going to have the Imperium fleet trapped. That pressure must be enormous, right? Like you can't bring everybody there and then say, sorry, guys, not going to happen today. We don't trust that we have, 1,000 or 2,000 spaces is enough to do what we need to do. That seems like it would be a hard call either way.
I mean, you don't make that call and then the Imperium make a song about you to passing, right? So
yeah, the Braves for Robin.
Yeah, I'll pass. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think it's just too juicy to say no to. And when you think about what's the worst that could happen in your head, the worst that can happen isn't quite this. But it happened. 75 Titans, real Titans died. 200 real plus Ghost Titans died, right? So if you think I'm just lying to you guys saying that the Ghost Titans are refit, you can believe that. The Ghost Titans are definitely refit and back at T5. You can see the pilots, you can see the things. It's not some sort of meme. You'll see the Mundak again, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, the Imperium now have this huge groundswell of just pure smug and swagger. Like this is going to be, you have to completely wipe the board clean and start all over if you're Pappy. You're going to have to start back from square one. All of that months and months of work that you've done to whittle them down, to take territory, to make these, advancements. Those are right now all gone. It doesn't mean your war is over. It doesn't mean you just give up and go home, but it does mean you have to compose yourself. You're going to get laughed at for a week. You're going to laughed at for a month. Who knows? But it's not what you did yesterday. It's what you do tomorrow that counts. And by all accounts, these people in Pappy, the fleet commanders and stuff, they're ready to just go back at it as soon as their super cap fleet is freed and they get back and they get they can wrap their heads around what just happened. They're planning to still attack, right? They're planning on still taking Delve. It's not, oh, there's a cap, we can never fight type thing. It's, this is how the server works. We have to work around that in order to achieve what we want. We have to come up with new strategies. We have to maybe remind ourselves of the strategies that we've used in the past, right? Some of the old things. So, there was a lot of waffling as to, maybe not waffling, but there's a lot of pontificating over what does this fight mean? We don't know what it means. We can say right now, the one thing that's for sure is that the Imperium are now winning, right? You can't spin that any other way. The Imperium are currently winning. We had DBRB on last night, and he said in his view, this isn't the Imperium's view, this is his view, but he's a senior member of the Imperium. He's been there forever. He thought that they were losing up until this moment. That was his just hot take, is we're losing, guys. And now they're definitely winning. There's not a single person that you can pull. You can take Billy, grab him up here, say, good morning, Billy. You just lost 75 Titans. Are you winning?
How do you feel?
He's going to be like, no, we're not winning right now. We got to get back to work. But that's the important part. Is the second part of that is we got to get back to work. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see what the nature of the bounce back is going to be. Is it going to be just too hard to bounce back? Is the Imperium going to start taking all of their territory back? Are they going to push Pappy out of T5? Because it's not outside the realm of possibilities that the Imperium, with this swagger, with this momentum, they could siege T5. They have the ability to do that. They could jump that gate. They don't even need a sign-on. They could just jump that gate, come in, start sieging T5. That would be a huge development. But yeah, it's just a matter of time to see how it's going to bounce back, not if there's going to be a bounce back.
Yeah. All right.
But really, guys, is it just me? When you look at the grand scheme of things, right? Of course, we're at this stage of the war where things are actually happening. But if I was comparing this to a fighting game, right, a one-up fighting game, both characters are still 75% in health, right? It's not really done that much. I think most people think that the caches are fairly big, right, in the 1,000 plus, and overall we haven't had 250 losses on each side yet, right?
Its percentages that are relatively small compared to the amount of firepower that's still available. The problem is you have Pappy has a lot of assets trapped in that system, right? They're buried right now. Doesn't mean they can't get out because PL managed to get out, but they're buried. And there's a counteroffensive going on right now, which is very smart. The Imperium is taking advantage of this situation right now. And I think they have reinforced, TCU is not a big deal. Fortizar. Well, anyway, they're reinforcing stuff. I don't know if it's a big deal or not. I'm just getting reports right now that they're reinforcing stuff.
Yeah, to Kalo's point, right? After this fight, you're like, oh, we just got a big win, but the boss music just starts playing a little bit faster, and you're like, what's going on? You start kind of freaking out. You don't really know what's going to happen next, and these two groups, they're led by the best, some of the most storied motivators that this game has ever seen. I don't expect them to give up, right? If this is a brutally clever empire from 2010, yeah, they're broken. They're gone. See you later, kid. But that's not what this is, right? These people are composed. They've messaged out to their members like, hey, yeah, we took it on the chin. This sucked. we'll get back to the business.
But at least more to the point of the whole internal organizational stuff. I don't know how much people are interested in this, because we're talking about the moral war. But what about things like this where FCs might not necessarily have agreed on something? I think we had the same thing at the other big node crash, right? Where it's this whole mistakes are made, and then you have this situation where the group is going to be split down the middle of the ones that said yes and the ones that said no, and who was right and who was wrong. And the internal strife, I think, is more relevant than necessarily something like the ground troops moral issue, because that can be managed either with narrative or with just pointing out, well, we haven't dipped into our resources more than like 10 or 15%, so we're fine. We can still tank the SRP as long as you're not wood chipper feeding battleships like a crazy person. The point is, I think it's going to come down to things like opinions of the FCs, so their individual moral, and not necessarily the big group. But I don't know if people agree with that.
That's going to be curious, right? That's a big point, right? So, or that's an important point, right? So if there's another opportunity like this, a huge like set piece battle, you think Pappy might flinch a little bit before making that first call? I think that there's a possibility that they might, right? Because they have a lot of people to deliberate with. The Imperium, Asher can just flop it down and be like, "Yeah, we're going." Like no ifs, ands, or buts. You're coming with me because we're one unit. Pappy, part of the advantage that they have is they have a lot of individual units that are working together. So they have a ton of FCs, so they've got more coordinating power. But also in a snap decision like that, you are still going to have to discuss it a little bit. I guess the good news for Pappy, if that is the case, that we see one of these fights take place in this conflict very infrequently, like once a quarter. So they're still going to be fine.
Yeah.
But I guess also the other maybe good thing, and this is us speculating, we're not exactly sure what happened, right? We weren't really flies on the wall, but it does appear like this was the call to go in. Where they went in was a test decision, or the test FCs made that decision. Whether it was ProGod, Billy, someone else in there, who knows? And they're also the ones that had to pay the price, right? So it's not like ProGod said, "Hey Vince, you got to jump in," and then NC lost all of their Titans. That could create some sort of discord. That could create some harsh moments. That is something that the Imperium could exploit, and get, like the cracks are forming. But in this case,
it's pushing the cracks, right? When there's an opportunity to make them make mistakes, what's the cost of that? It's about creating strife indirectly, right? Now, we heard Killer was on here, and I'm a little bit of a fan of Killer, but to me, it feels like he's been overruled a few times on some of these calls, and I'm just thinking, if I was personally an upper echelon person, FC-wise, and I got overruled and proven right several times in a row, I'd end up in a position where if I was then also getting massive losses, I would flip table and go, okay, this is not going to happen. If I'm going to get overruled on things like this and you're going to keep making mistakes, I'm out of here. And I think we've seen similar things in history in Goons, right? We've had a lot of people actually leave the Imperium, or back when it was still Goons, because of things like this. The cracks forming is definitely a thing. And how many of the star players can you lose before you lose a war, right?
Well, he's not a lost player because he's not part of this campaign. He doesn't have time. That's different than saying, I disagree with the decisions. I'm going to go my own way and do my own thing. Very different.
But he's still a voice in his group, a massive one, right?
I think
Sure. Yeah.
I think Killa has put himself into the position where he does not want to be the one making the calls, right? If he wanted to take over, and if he wanted to be the one accountable, I'm sure people would not bend over backwards, but they would accommodate him and respect what he's saying. But he's put himself in a position where he doesn't want to be the one taking this. This is something that I probably beat into him a little bit while he was in PL, right? And this is something that was beaten into me too. If you're an active person, you get to make the decisions. If you're an inactive old guard with ideas, tell me your ideas. That's great, but don't be mad if no one listens to you because you're not on the ground doing the work. So that's definitely like a very a killer vibe, right? So I don't think he's sitting here snickering, saying, "Oh, I told you so, guys. Let me take over." Like he's happily pinging out his World of Warcraft guild and just chilling, doing whatever he wants. He's being killer, right? Like
after the fight, he's like, "Let's go play WoW."
Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
But it is going to be so. The next week, I think, is lost for Pappy. Like I think you do nothing for the next week. Not that you have to sit and mope and lick your wounds. I just think they won't be able to do anything of really strategic significance. But how they respond, how they bounce back in the middle of January, towards the end of January, that's going to be the really interesting thing here. And also, I'm super interested to see what the Imperium is going to do, right? So they're in this position where they can make a hubris mistake, which would be very uncharacteristic of them, but it is possible. They could analyze a situation, think they're stronger than they are, or think Pappy is weaker than they are, and make a decision where they will start losing ground. Like these are possibilities that we have to look out for. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Imperium are just going to sit on what they have as their win. They're a composed group. They know what the stakes are. They know they have played this literal game before. They've been in this physical position before where you've gotten an enemy's super cap fleet trapped, and they know how to respond. So I think this week, if you're looking for a bounce back, you're not going to see it, and that's not going to be a disaster sign for Pappy. I think with the big notes is going to be like what happens in the next 2 weeks, the next 3 weeks, and how much is this actually going to cost them? I think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think the PUIG iHub, the Doom clock was at 33 days, so T-minus 2 days or T-minus 1 day. I think that got reset. I could be wrong. Someone could just be memeing me. But that's a significant thing, right? So losing a little bit of territory that you grounded for, that's a big thing.
I just think that there's a little bit of a danger. I'm not going to sit here and give advice for the Pappy forces directly, but I think there's a little bit of a danger with this narrative with the whole server crash, and because
there wasn't a crash. There wasn't a crash. The server never crashed.
No, they just misbehaved. My point is, I don't think that it's a good idea to use that narrative because of the things that Elise just mentioned, with the fact that they're a bigger organization with a lot more voices, a lot more opinions. So you can't like strong arm people into thinking in one single way, or basically get everyone to drink the Kool-Aid, right? There's a limitation to that, right? So running a narrative like this might actually hurt your own morale instead of actually boosting it. So I think they should get off that narrative, because as Killer has mentioned, come on, guys, you know how this game works. And Grath was rage facing on New Eden show with Redline. It's like, let's not do this whole blaming the server thing and blaming CCP, right? It's really bad for morale, and I think the Imperium have learned this lesson better. Maybe
I missed the Grath thing. What happened there? He was
just. I think it was basically when people were getting really frustrated with the server performance, and then Redline was just spewing that thing massively on his thing, and Grath came on and was a guest. And it ended up in basically Grath doing his Grath version of what Killer just said. So basically, come on, shut the fuck up. That's not a thing. You know this game. This is how the game works.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same for everyone that plays it. And we've already seen this favoring both parties in this war already. Mm-hmm. So let's stop with this blame game.
Yeah, I think what's different for me, and I mentioned this yesterday, was the too big to fail argument. Now, you're not supposed to leverage the game itself, the mechanics or the mechanic limitations, in order to outplay your opponent. That's called an exploit. If you grow an alliance to 6,000 people, let's say this is fictional, and you stick them into a system in order to defend a Keepstar, isn't that an extension of that logic?
But Matterall, I think it's a known fact that every group in EVE Online tiptoes on the line and the edge of that rule you just mentioned, right? When are you tiptoeing into the boundary of exploit? We had a massive discussion when we talked about Bubblegate, right?
Right.
Is that an exploit? Well, CCP deemed that it's not, so it's not, and that is the meta game that we play. And as Killer was pointing out,
but that's a tactic. That's not using the server, or that's not using a limitation of the game.
Well, but
that was a tactic.
But it's knowing how the game works and what CCP allows and what the servers can handle and all these things, and the big guys in EVE speculate on this all the time.
Right.
They push the boundary, and it really is where experienced veteran dudes like Elise, like Killer, like Laz, like hell, even like Sir Molly, but he's been out of the loop for quite a while. This is what these guys know, and this is what they apply to basically make it a winning strategy without crossing the border into exploit, right?
Yeah. To Caleb's point, if someone from Pappy leadership walks out tomorrow, addresses their members, say, hey, no, we made a perfect decision. The server is what screwed us. And the server is solely to blame. They've absolutely lost it. Like they should just be removed from this whole thing because they're going to crumble. The moment when you start blaming solely the server for something that happens, that's when you have lost too much footing to ever rebound from. Obviously, you can say something, and this is actually true, is we knew shit was going to go bad. We just didn't know that this was the level of bad we would get, because it is unprecedented. You could say, this happened 11 years ago. This happened 6 years ago. This happened whatever years ago. That's kind of irrelevant. The last time something similar like this happened, I think the closest thing is KVN, where things just turned off. So you can kind of skirt around it that way. But if you say that the only bad decision was us deciding to play EVE Online, then you're completely done. So that I don't expect anyone to say that either, right? I think there's going to be the statement that's going to be put out, and it will probably get twisted a little bit, is, we took a calculated risk, but boy, we didn't understand the math, right? Like we weren't exactly sure what was going to happen.
Or the math is hidden. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we made a calculated risk. We saw what was on the table. This isn't a death blow to us, blah, 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 blah. Going forward, we're going to make sure we're not in a situation like this. There you go. That's it. Put a bow on it. It's run, wrap it, send it. You're good to go. Come back in 2 weeks when the numbers start to stabilize a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm looking at larger themes, and you can take away whatever group, right? Nobody wants a blue donut. Nobody wants Serenity. We know Serenity was a bad ending to a server, although it wasn't the ending. It was just a bad result. Or maybe it's not. Maybe you want an empire that controls all of nullsec, and then you have an insurgency, and that's fun gameplay. But it seems to me that you want different groups with varying objectives that conflict with one another, and therefore you have conflict in the outlaw space areas. Actually, now that I think about it, there is no guarantee that that's the only way EVE can exist. You can literally colonize the entire outlaw space and cartel it or whatever, and that's still viable gameplay. The blue donut is viable EVE Online gameplay, if that's what you want. I'm not sure that's what most people want. So, but I think if you're looking at it in terms of, oh, wow, this blue donut is formed. Let's say it's Pappy. Pappy wins this war, and they're the ones that are now a giant coalition, and they control all of outlaw space, and they eliminate competitors. And every time you try to destroy a Pappy Keepstar, all they do is pile in 6,000 people, say, form up, somebody's trying to take this. That to me feels like you're exploiting the game because you know its limitations. That's a problem. Too big to fail, I think, is an actual problem. And I think we're there. I think we've actually arrived at that. But that's my own personal perspective.
I think it's a lot more complicated than that, right? We saw
might be there. Oh, sorry.
Well, we saw the casino war thing. There's nothing that is unassailable or completely too big to push over, right? We've seen this before. This is how Bob ended. This is how goons have been pushed back at least 3 times throughout EVE history, right? Even when they go through a phase that we just went through, which is basically the fat years, which was crazy, right? We covered the economic numbers a lot on Push to Talk. This should have been practically unassailable, right? But they're not. So I think we are actually still in health. Of course, I have opinions about how the ecosystem is broken, and that right now, if the war ended, we would go back in some horrible situation pretty fast, right? I think I mentioned that something like Frat might actually go bonkers and become the new king and become almost untoppable. But the point is that this game ebbs and flows, and once you've been around as long as people like myself and Elise and Sword Dragon, and well, it's the nature of the game. So I don't think I haven't seen a massive problem that isn't something that can be solved. At least if CCP steps in and actually tries to fix it.
Yeah. Now remember, my example, too big to fail, is actually Pappy winning this war and then becoming too big to fail. So just so you know, that's the example I use, but it could be anybody.
Great news about that. If you're thinking that the last time a coalition of similar people went up against in World War B1, Tess had to move to the other side of the galaxy to avoid getting shot by everyone else. So
CO2 as well.
Yeah.
But that's because certain leaders, like you, because you were involved in that. I think that I wonder how much of that, you tell us, how much of that is a calculation, or how much of that is like, we're doing this. I don't know. Why would you do that? Make a decision to break up a coalition that just won a big war?
So in my brain, right, and this, I don't get to make these decisions anymore, right? So I don't. My opinion doesn't really matter, right? But in my head, every time I've tried to plan something for the very long term, like every time, if I try and play like 7D chess, right, and try and go a few moves ahead, my opponent never falls into what I want. Maybe it just means I'm bad at strategy, but I would much rather have fun in the short to medium term where I know I can have fun there. And I can kind of build my members just based on that, and build, momentum based on that, than just sit and play the ultra long game. And it's like when you're playing Risk, right? If you sit in Australia and just build up forever and watch everyone else kill each other, I can't do that, right? I want to be the guy that's goofing around, having 6 months to 1 year old, or not 1 year old, but 6 month to 1 year, like looking in the future plans. And those you can get like 70% right? So just go ahead and do that. It's more fun anyways. And I think there's a lot of leaders in EVE Online who are like that. I do think you have people like Gobbins who have an aptitude for looking in the long term, not necessarily playing the ultra long game, but being able to predict what will happen in that ultra long game. Gobbins is the type of person that we don't talk about very much, the leader of Pandemic Horde, but he is in some ways, and this might be giving him too much credit, but I think he's like exceedingly gifted at predicting how things are going to play out. And I wish he would talk more. So we can take that stuff and like put him into a corner and at least grab him when he is wrong. But no, we don't really know. But there are people like that who are just very gifted at playing the ultra long game.
He's one of the most mysterious players of EVE Online, and that he keeps a low profile, but he's brilliant. And everybody that talks to him comes out thinking like, wow, this guy is brilliant. And it's funny because I used to hear that too. It's like, Gobbins, that guy's brilliant. And I'd be like, oh yeah, sure, everybody's brilliant, but then you actually like get to know him and you realize like, no, he's brilliant. Like he's got a lot of perspective, and it's never what you think it's going to be. So it's very original thinking, which is interesting. But
he's also extremely experienced with the game, right? This is similar to someone like Elise, even though Elise is selling himself short a little bit.
Yeah, he is. Elise, you are selling yourself short.
When you've been around for this long, you kind of know what is going to happen when you get these rats that are moving around in a certain way, right? It's the same with someone like Sword Dragon that was on yesterday on INN, actually commenting on everything that's been happening. And when you have 5 years or more experience in EVE Online, these things become almost like second nature. Like you can see these things in these plays. I think Imperium actually predicted the war about a month or two before it was even potentially possible, just because of small shenanigans that were happening behind the scenes, right? And people saying stuff in channels. So we can do this predictive stuff because we've seen it happen so many times. And of course, anyone out there in the audience that have not played for 5 years or more and wants to get into all this strategy stuff, I would suggest you actually go and read the books, because then you get to see this long perspective that we're kind of talking about now, how it always ebbs and flows, and there's always new character coming in and old characters being pushed back a little bit. And well, but the fun thing is that if you stick to the game, right, if you really stick with it, you will be part of it almost forever. This is why I kind of agree with Hilmer's Eve forever, because it's really, really hard to quit something that you know so well and have been a part of for so many years. It's not even the sunken cost fallacy. It's just, once you're a Boy Scout, you will always be a Boy Scout.
Suetonia, you want to weigh in on any of this?
No, everything you guys said seems pretty accurate to me.
Like, why do you do low sec though? Because you're not a null sec player per se. You were in Karma Fleet at one point, but I'm sure that was to solo roam. Do you avoid this stuff on purpose because it's just too, I don't know, constraining, or is it just really something that can't fit into your lifestyle or something? What's the reason you avoid nullsec?
I don't necessarily avoid nullsec. I tend to just avoid like very large social groups. I prefer like smaller groups where it's just me and like maybe 20, 30 other people who I'm like close with, and we have a good relationship, rather than being in like a big alliance where I don't even know like 90% of the people.
Okay. Well said.
It is so this is one of the moments where, like, if you're in a big alliance, if you're in the Imperium, or if you're in Pappy right now, the biggest moment of your Eve career was probably in the system of M2 Dash. Whether it was last night or whether it was Thursday or Wednesday, whatever it was, you had like a huge moment. The crazy part of all of that is 90% of the game has no idea that happened, right? And this is like, not only do they not know it happened, but in some levels they don't care. Like, they have someone that they're rooting for. Don't get me wrong. And this is one of the coolest parts that happened in E, right? Random people in high sec or low sec that aren't involved, once they know that there's a conflict, they actually do have a group that they're rooting for, and they'll actually be way passionate arguments about like who's actually winning, blah blah blah. But they don't care what's going on. They don't care that there's a big fight. They don't care about 75 Titans dying, 200 Titans dying.
They don't care about whether there are or aren't server limits or tie-dye, because this is not their reality at all, is it? They didn't even have tie-dye while this battle was going on.
Yeah, they were just completely oblivious to everything going on, unless they went on Twitch or they talked to someone that was, involved, right?
Yeah.
So it is funny to have that type of perspective in this thing. This feels like your world, but to other people, it's just a little blip of what's to come. Like, they don't even care that this whole conflict is really going on. They're just like, oh, my pyrite prices have gone up. I'm sure someone fed a bunch of ravens. This is cool. Or just like completely no idea. It is in a way humbling when you realize that, and this is true for all aspects of the game, not just nullsec, right? When you come to the realization that the way you play Eve is not the same way that other people play Eve, and in fact, you're probably in the minority, and everyone else is kind of playing this whole other world that you're in, but just completely different than you.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people who are like, Pro God who? Who's Pro God what?
The Hot Wings guy? Yeah, I remember him.
No, it's the Hot Wings guy. Or the guy that trips on stream and falls off screen. Like, he's had some classic moments. All right, cool. So there's a big week for combat. I have to say, though, Caleb, this might be something up your alley. The other day, the midweek, the first battle, we looked at it and we were like, oh my God, this is much bigger than the casualty rate at BTAC R, and it matched the amount of money lost in real terms, like 300,000 plus. So this was essentially BTAC R. It actually strategically is more important than BTAC R, but gosh, it doesn't feel like it. It feels like Battleship space.
But that's also because it feels like there's like more money and in a different way than back then. I'm pretty sure that on a universal value lost back in the original Bloodbath, I think that was bigger proportional to what it is now. But to the meaning of the fight, I also think this last one was really rather small, right? So we need another one or two more of these before we can even start talking about it being at the same critical level as BTAG-R. Eve is another beast right now, right?
And one of them, maybe, and silver lining is probably not the best way to put it, but yeah, let's call it silver lining. After Head GP, which was a massive thing, BTAG-R happened, and the winners of those sides were flipped, right? The guys that lost in Head GP and never loaded ended up taking a huge victory in BTAG-R. The guys that won, and that was like 4 days later, the guys that won in BTAG-R, they actually ended up losing the war, right? So these big fights are hugely important. Don't get me wrong, and they're massive. They're huge momentum shifts one way or another. But it doesn't mean that everything is over. It doesn't mean that there's no possibility of you having a even swaggier win later, right? So as I think Caleb put it best, is that there is an ebb and flow to this whole thing, and just probably couched in the best way possible about the whole M2 thing. And we pulled Asher while he was in the middle of it all, right? So it was like we just got him perfect. He wasn't able to think about this almost stream of consciousness. He was like, this is, it's not like he was like, he actually said this. He said, this is a win, but it's not a victory, right? And I think that's an important way to look at this.
It's a nice way to.
I think to add to that, and what you were saying about things happening in the game that you're completely oblivious to, right? Like when there's weird wormhole drama and evictions, and the rest of the Eve is going, there's a what? Or some of the stuff with the Triglavian things, right? Which up until Niaja, everyone was just going, there's a what, right? You don't notice these things until they become relevant to you. And I think the ebb and flow and the drama of Eve is that there's always an unknown. I know that sounds like American politics, but the point is that it is true in Eve, right? There is always this an unknowns that you had not counted on at all. Like, what's going to happen if there was a massive ban of an organization that's vital to the game, just like we had with the casinos, right? There's always something happening that is completely almost impossible to predict. And then, of course, something that's right up your alley, Mallory, it is kind of predictable to some people, which makes it a little bit of an unfair advantage. This is not a CSM league argument, but people that's been around for a long time and know that something has been discussed many, many times, like we need a Titan killer, or casinos are bad for the game, or things like this, right? Or multi-boxing is undermining the playability of the game, or SP injection. When we have these dead horse discussions, eventually we're going to get to a point where CCP actually steps up and fixes it. And if you have planned for that fix, you're going to come out ahead.
Well, again, and I've heard this from several people, even Kilobee to some degree, the result was predictable if you take 6,000 in one system and try to move them in a system that already has 4,500. Like, you're not going to get that many people in there, regardless of how much CCP has improved the servers. I don't think they weren't trying to get 6,000 people in. All they needed was 1,000 Titans, for instance. So it wasn't like they were trying to get everybody in. They were trying to get a few more in, and that didn't really work out either. I think the first, at least didn't Billy say that like the first two fleets got in? It was the third one that got stuck or something?
I don't really remember, right? But you make a really good point, right? So if you're just sitting in your armchair going, ha ha ha, those idiots, they tried to jump 6,000 people in. What fools! Like, yeah, no one thinks that's going to happen seamlessly, right? So, but the idea is if you could get 200 faxes in, and then your 800 Titans in. We're talking about 1,000 people when locals at between 4,500 to 5,500. You have your war right then. Like you have that fight you want with those 1,000 people. Those are the ones that you tried to get in first, anyways. So you don't care about the other 5,000. Yeah, they are going to play a role eventually, maybe. But you want the whole fight changes if those 1,000 people do load. And there was a possibility that I mean, we've seen that happen before, right? It's not like that would be an unprecedented move. But I mean, either way you want to wrap it, right? The end result, the result that we ended up getting is big Imperium win, big Pappy defeat. A lot of Titans are dead over the last 5 days. More Titans have died in the last 3 days than any other 3-day period ever. 260 died in M2 on Thursday. Another 75 plus who knows how many count on this one are also dead.
Yeah, we still don't know. That's a lot.
2011 has killed a lot of Titans so far.
Wait, what do you mean 2011?
Or 2021, sorry.
2020, yeah. You're back in the past.
Yeah, I see that one and I'm like, 2011, why W? I remember that.
Yeah. Some neat coincidences in here. But that's what I was trying to get to with Caleb was we're seeing a lot of Titans die, and yet war's not over. At least that's what we think. And there's still a lot of Titans on both sides. It just feels
only 10%, right?
Yeah, it's. I mean, even in the first battle, they had 1,300 Titans cycle through that system.
But this is where Elise would interrupt and say, yeah, there might be that many Titans, but because there's also way more Titan pilots now, then it's a different scenario, right?
And they can be stored.
Losing 10%, it hurts many more players because, well, back 5 years ago, we didn't have this amount of Titan pilots available, right? So
or storage.
Storage. So there's these two factors as well. So now 10% might actually count a little bit more than it would have 5 or 10 years ago.
It will be curious to see how they can recoup the losses, right? I know I'm changing direction a little bit, but I was thinking about it after the first M2. Both sides, I know PL recovered all their losses. I know Horde recovered all their losses. NC, they were like 2 Titans short, but they were getting them that day that were coming on a move fleet. I'm pretty sure Legacy got all theirs replaced. Is that something they're going to be able to do again? That absolutely yes, but when is that going to happen is going to be a curious thing. I know there was a lot of people that logged in on both sides that hadn't logged in some time because they wanted this big elusive Titan fight. Are those guys going to log in again? Even if they do have a Titan, like even if they say, hey, guy that logged in for the first time in 6 years, we gave you your Titan back. We've got another fight coming. Are you going to come in again? Who knows? That's going to be a big question mark that we have to see. I suspect that this is going to be a little bit of a blip. Okay, a big blip. This is going to be a massive road bump, right? Like
eclipse.
But I don't think it is going to be conflict deciding. But it might. That's the cool part.
Isn't that a sign that there is a sickness, right? Like we all knew it. We all knew this game is out of whack. And so did CCP, and they said, okay, we're going to do this scarcity thing and really clamp down on the production of these big ships, or at least make it harder for you guys to produce these things. And here we're seeing what they were seeing on their statistics. We're seeing it actually in the game. Thousands of Titans doing battle to the point where servers crash. And it's not the end. It's not a doomsday for these Titans. They can live to fight another day, even if they lose 100 of them. It shows you there was a problem.
Yeah, but from a bloodletting point of view, I think I would only say that we need maybe 2 more of these fights. And I'm not going to say we're in health, but we're in a point where then I can definitely see the carrot coming out and we would be in something resembling health, because a new competition, a new normal would arise. I just want CCP to pay very much attention to the number that we've been discussing a little bit over the time of this war, because I jokingly said it's not really a war. Creation and destruction numbers need to be more in balance. We need to see effects of players actually punching each other in the nose. It needs to dip down so there is shortage forming, not necessarily on a individual or group level, but on a global level. We need to see these shortages actually have an impact.
Yeah, you did say this wasn't a war. Do you think it's a war now?
No. It's a strategic war when it comes to who's who, but from a macroeconomic point of view, no, we do not have. Well, maybe now, a little bit.
Maybe today.
Maybe the past week or two. But when you average it out, I would almost be inclined to still say definitely not, because we have not seen anything remotely like old school destruction numbers. In the past, when there was wars, the destruction numbers got so crazy that it bled the entire server for months and months. And I'm sure that Elise can remember how long did it take for the Mexilon to come back after there had been a big fight, right? It took forever, right? Because it was just crazy shortage.
Well, maybe it's by percentage, like you said something, sorry, Elise, to cut you off, that at least you said that, look, we jumped into something of a similar situation where we had some instability. We lost 4 of our total 6 Titans. You lost 2/3 of your total Titan arsenal. That's much different than losing 10%. So times have changed, but go ahead.
So if we're going to go in a way back machine, right? If you want to illustrate Caleb's point a little bit more, 11 years ago, and I'm going to sound like an old man. I don't care at this point. I'm an old man. I'm a boomer.
Just
11 years ago, Pandemic Legion and the Goon Swarm, or Goon Fleet, fight Band of Brothers. They jumped their Titan fleet into Y-2 A&O. 4 of the 6 Titans that PL had died. 4 of the 6 we had died. That was such a horrible loss that we just gave up on that region for a little bit and came back again a little while later. Like that's how catastrophic it was. We were just like, okay, well, that's over. we're done. It didn't happen overnight, right? But it happened in like 2 months or so. It was such a, not debilitating, but it was such a painful loss that we moved over and had to do something completely different. You're talking about replacing them was not overnight. We had a good income stream. We had dysprosium. We had like good money coming in, but there just wasn't the infrastructure in the game. There wasn't the mechanics to rebuild them fast enough. And we didn't have the people that could actually fly it at the same time, because at the time, Titan pilots, they were the cream of the crop. They had to be specialized. They had to be basically playing for long periods of time in order to get to that point. But yeah, that was absolutely crippling. In this case, it's whatever, replaced.
Yeah. Right. And that's why we're pointing to it, saying, look, there was a problem, guys. Scarcity needed to happen. Here's your evidence. You're losing hundreds of Titans, dwarfs everything we've ever seen, and it's a flesh wound. It's a mere scratch.
I will say,
devastating.
I was going to say it is, and I really hope CCP are paying attention to everything that's going on, right? I know people have been kind of giving them flack, and I think they're coming from the right place. But I really hope that they see what's going on now and they don't go, oh yeah, we did this because of scarcity, right? Like this has nothing to do really with scarcity. The fact that the Titan battle took place, not the fact that there's pain afterwards. Right? So I hope they don't look at this and say, oh, everything we did caused this. I hope they have some semblance of context, saying like, oh, these people like shooting each other in the face.
Yeah. I think it is a flesh wound. 57 Titans for test. They're, two Titans for NC. I don't see this as a debilitating loss. It's an ugly loss. On paper, it's a really ugly loss because it's 150 Titans. What was it, Suetonia? How many Titans versus how many real Titans?
Let me check quickly. I believe it was 87 real supers altogether with 75 Titans.
So same as BTAC R. Those are the real ones, right? But on paper, it's much more than that, right? Isn't it like 150? How many like ghost Titans?
Yeah, there was 90 ghost Titans destroyed. So altogether, I believe there's 160 Titans were destroyed, but only 75 of them were actual real ones, from what we can tell from Ezekiel board.
Yeah, so 167, that's getting significant, especially because it's on one side only. That's a significant imbalance. But it starts to get down to 75. That still is significant, but it's just not compared to how many are out there. Hundreds and hundreds, like 400 or 500 Titans on either side. So we have a long way to go, basically.
So there are people that I guess probably tuned in after we kind of discussed what these are, and I just want to go over what we're saying when we mean like a reals Titan and a ghost Titan. So because of the server instability, we're not really sure exactly what happened, but there are some Titans that jumped in, and they generated a kill mail, they generated a loss mail, people shot them, and they exploded. They took essentially less than 1 million damage, and they were completely unfit. The pilots or the instances where that happened, there were pilots that were never in those ships, and that never really got to see the grid. Those ships are actually back in the system that they started in. And they're back in their ships, back with their fits. This is not some sort of weird spin or anything like that. You can go there and message a guy, ask him for a screenshot, whatever you want to do to prove it to yourself. But these ones, like they didn't, I don't want to say they didn't really die, but they're still in their ships, right? So they died and they didn't die at the same time. So they're in this weird, bizarre world because of what the server did. We've seen similar things happen before. Nothing really quite on the scale. I've never seen half of them get saved, right? But if you look on Zkill and things did take damage, right? They didn't have their modules active. The pilots might not have been able to push the buttons, but they were, according to the server, in the system, and their death counts, right? They woke up today in a pod. They didn't wake up today in a Titan.
Yeah, the Ghost Titans, it's really strange, and I didn't realize there was so many of them, 90.
And so sometimes we've seen where if you die in a ship under heavy lag, you can still kind of control your ship, but it's on fire and weird stuff happens, and you're like, I survived, guys. And then after downtime, like downtime hits, and the server kind of yoinks that away from you again. They're like, oh, that thing died. We just forgot to tell you. So this has persisted after a downtime. So these things, it's not, I don't think they're going to be taken unless CCP intervenes and says, "Ooh, we're going to take those away," which I don't think they will. The same way I don't think CCP are going to intervene and say, "Oh, this happened. We're going to give you your stuff back." Sorry, like that's not going to happen, right? And no one's really hoping for that. No one's expecting that, to say the least.
Do you know that we look at the kill board and we compare, I don't know how Suetonia came up with his stats, but we trust Suetonia. But have you talked to people? Do they still have the Titans after downtime? Do we know if
Yep. Everyone I've asked does, and I've asked quite a few people. There's one person in my corp. This has an even funnier story, right? So one of the people in my corp was a bridging Titan for the subcap fleet who was bridging to the Fortizar, which was on grid with the Keepstar. He hit bridge. The bridge went up. No one was really able to get through. He hit bridge again. Bridge went up. A few people got through, or at least got put in the jump tunnel. Then he disconnected. And then we're like, oh, well, we'll just get a new bridge Titan. It's fine. He went to bed. He was like, oh, well, I disconnected in T5 on my Keepstar after bridging to the Fortizar. He went to bed. He woke up to some weird messages this morning, 6 hours after he hit the bridge button, not the jump button, the bridge button. His Titan showed up somewhere in M2- at a safe spot and died and generated a kill mail with no fits or modules on it. We ran a locator on him. The locator puts him back or puts him in M2, but if you look up the corpse screen, it shows him in T5 in an Erebus. So he petitioned to try and figure out which one of the two positions he's actually in, because the game is actually saying he's in two spots. Wow. And he died and he didn't die, but it does show him in the Erebus. So it's just a lot of weird, funky stuff happened.
Yeah. McLeod brought up a good point. What happens to the insurance money if you actually get blown up, but you still own the ship? Do you just kind of get paid for your trouble? Do you get the $2 billion?
You don't get any insurance, as far as we're aware. Of the one person I asked, like the court mate of mine who died but didn't die, is M2, but not really an M2. He got no insurance money, right? We pulled a wallet API on him. He got no money out of it. So it's also important to note they didn't generate Rex. They didn't generate, like, no loot dropped, right? Obviously they show unfit on Zkill, but no other stuff in like their fleet hangar dropped or anything like that.
It's wild. All right. Well, I mean, the good news is a lot of people tuned in to the battle. The biggest battle I've ever commentated on was 11,500, I believe, or was it 12? It might have been 12,500, and that was the $1 million fight that got broadcast thanks to ProGod all over the world. And we had a lot of people curious to see what $1 million in an MMO RPG was going to look like. So that was when I was commentating at INN. But we had almost the same amount watching this fight, and it's the same as Cyberpunk 2020. Any chance we can put that graphic up, McLeod? I'll give it a second. So it's these battles are of interest, not just to the people who are in them, but also people who are coming by to see what's going on in EVE Online. Obviously, people like to read about these fights. I do think, though, it's really funny. You have this great fight that happens before servers work. Everybody's pretty happy. They both think they won, and that's good publicity. But then you have the opposite, where the server collapses, and it's not a victory, it's a win, according to Asher. So it feels a little bit less worthy of celebration unless you're Imperium. I'm sure they'll celebrate, and they should. But as far as like being a spectator of the game or even understanding the game and its overall health, this is not a good day for the server. We know it happens, but it's still not. It's not what you want to celebrate about this game.
But I don't think it's bad optics. I think people that claim this is bad optics are wrong. I think this is massively good optics for CCP. They are showing the world that they have the most weird and crazy, amazing game, and no one has anything like it, and reminding people that it's still around. I still think that a lot of interest vaporized a little bit over the past 5 years because the drama drivers were not really there. Exactly what is the reason we can discuss until the cows come home. But the point is that now they might actually start paying attention again because there is this big stuff happening. And I hope that it goes on. And maybe it slows down the war a little bit, this whole thing. But I think that's mostly a moral thing. I think it's going to pick back up eventually.
We couldn't get through a show without you saying you're wrong. You're classic wrong. Oh, that's great.
It annoys me when people are basically projecting their own situation in the game onto the optics of the game, and this is just I'm almost inclined to quote that Imperium saying, right? Good old DJ, and it is true. Inside this game, the nerds themselves, they have this personal experience of it, and it's definitely nothing compared to what it is on viewed from the outside. It's very different.
Yeah, Asher was saying why this game is special yesterday. I thought that was pretty cool. He was saying, that feeling you get when your team wins a game, that feeling of elation. There's a lot of drama, and then there's elation at the win. Like, that's the feeling you get, and that's the binding mechanism of the Imperium. Like, it feels like being part of that kind of a team.
I think that communicates all the way down to smaller teams. Everything that you do in Eve matters a ton more than any activity in any other game.
Yeah. All right. We've reached the end of the show. At least you got anything else?
No, I mean, I'm just excited to see what happens next. Really, good win for Imperium. You guys got a nice bounty for yourself. Pappy, now is your time to respond. I'm stoked.
Yeah, they got to loot the field this time, right? I mean, they looted it a bit last time, but this time they really got to loot it because nobody could destroy the Rex. Nobody was in there to destroy the Rex. But Ghost Titans, I wonder if they dropped anything. I gotta find that out.
As far as we know, they didn't drop anything.
Oh.
Yeah, the Ghost ones didn't even generate a wreck. I talked to one Imperium dude who killed a Titan that didn't materialize a wreck at like 6:00. Which was a full 7 hours after the jump command was given. He killed the ship. It just disappeared. It didn't drop a wreck. It didn't explode. It didn't do a nice, cool infographic. So I'm not sure if that's what happened to the other 100 or whatever of them, but
this feels a little Pavlovian to me, where you spray the dog with bacon powder in the air, so he can't actually eat anything, but he can taste it. And that's kind of what this victory feels like to me. It's like, I can taste the bacon, but where is it? No, they're Ghost Titans, 90 of them. That's crazy. That's a crazy high amount of Titans. That's more than half. Oh, well. Suetonia, thanks. Elise, thanks. Caleb, thanks. Oh, by the way, Suetonia, is there anything else you wanted to mention?
Not specifically. I do think it'll be interesting watching some of the other battlegrounds in the war, like Catch now with this thing. So if you take a look at the map in Catch on Dotland, I think almost every single iHub in the northern half of Catch now has been destroyed or replaced by like a third party or a group that's like tangentially allied to the Imperium. And you can see in the sort of the southern part of Catch, like outside of Brave Space, a lot of the Evictus iHubs have been reinforced. So with a lot of big stuff being trapped around Delve, or at least like the replacement stuff being moved to around there, it'll be interesting to see like how powerful initiative can be, like when it comes to like sieging like actual citadels in this area, because. If they have a couple hundred dreadnoughts or something, and there's not as many Titans or supers to respond to them now, then they might be able to do some even more damage down there.
That's great to hear. Now I feel like we have a real war. Like the World War B was awful because it was kind of just, and I was on NC at the time, just an invasion. Sorry, at least not to take anything away from that. It took a lot of manpower, but it felt like an unfair invasion, and I was very much against it. The Imperium went down to Delve and recovered and created a big empire that was supposedly impregnable because it was just could resist any war of attrition. And we saw it essentially collapse into Delve. And now it feels like finally we're seeing more fronts open up in significant ways, not little skirmishes that are kind of wins. These are like, it's starting to really look like a war. And we finally have some big head-to-head fights. And Imperium's coming out ahead, and that is turning the war around. So it feels like, wow, now we don't know the ending, and this is great. This is what we hope for. We want a large amount of destruction, especially among the Titans and the super carriers, to really bring down the amounts of those things so they become more important. Because right now they're important, but they feels like everybody has one. You know what I mean? And we want to see different types of warfare to make this war more interesting. And I think we're finally really getting that. So I think that's great. Okay. All right. Thanks again, Caleb, Elise, Suetonia, and McLeod with the visuals and engineering. Thank you guys all very much for hanging out with us. And thank you. What do we get? Like 800 people. One thing, a couple of announcements. Make sure that you sign up for our newsletter that we have, because you can get game news inside the game, which might be helpful to you, here's how you do that.
Later. I have to go get my phone.
I'll put it in chat now. You sign up for the TIS News mail list inside your mail client inside the game. So check that out. Also, we got partner this week, and during the live streams, everybody gave us a bunch of subscriptions. We want to say thanks to those guys. We had a lot of subscriptions that were gifted to people. And we want to say thanks very much to those guys that did that. And what else? Oh, check out Yvonne Talking in Stations during the week and inside of our Discord. If you want to come and discuss EVE Online with some advanced players, and if you're a new guy and you want to get some questions answered, Talking in Stations Discord is where you want to go. Among other places, of course. And that's it today. Thanks very much, guys. We will see you next time on Talking in Stations.
Talking Stations. You guys were only on for an hour and a half today?